The Atlanta Hawks are going through a rough patch right now, and really since making the Dejounte Murray trade, they just haven't been the team they were hoping to be. They find themselves now 11th in the Eastern Conference, even below the Chicago Bulls, which is pretty crazy. The Chicago Bulls have been playing pretty decent basketball without Zach LaVine, and the Atlanta Hawks have not been playing good team basketball, especially with the absence of Jalen Johnson this season. And he does a lot of the hard work for them that, first of all, Trae Young doesn't do, and just kind of what they've needed in the front court next to Clint Capella, next to Onyeka Okongwu. They've had some challenges with Jalen Johnson's injury, especially after trading away John Collins this past offseason for seemingly pennies on the dollar. And when we look at Atlanta as a whole, I can't really fault them for going in on the Dejounte Murray trade, because I myself thought, hey, this could have some real benefits to it. And one of those things that I expected to see that we just haven't was seeing more Trae Young moving off the ball. And we just never have really gotten that version of Trae Young, with all the Steph Curry comparisons coming out of college and in the NBA draft, and since then, with his range and elite three-point shot making, his ability to maneuver a pick and roll, he's one of the better point guards in the NBA, but he's a point guard. He doesn't play off the ball very well, and that's okay, but because of that construct and that context, Dejounte Murray's not the right player there in Atlanta. So really, the Hawks, in my opinion, now have a choice. Do we keep Trae Young or do we keep Dejounte Murray? And why? And I think really we're hearing with the rumors and the speculation right now that Dejounte Murray is the player to potentially get traded. I wanted to break down some potential Dejounte Murray trades and some teams that I thought would be interested in the star guard if he does actually become available this trade deadline. Now, a reminder, I'm going to be live on the channel during the trade deadline, so that's something you're going to want to stay tuned for. Make sure you're catching up on all the videos up until then. We're going to have trade guides coming out. We're going to have an Atlanta Hawks trade guide coming out soon as well, hopefully. So make sure to stay tuned for all that content. Leave a like and subscribe if you are enjoying. And in this video, we're going to do it a little bit differently. I do want to talk about actual, fleshed out trade packages. But in this one, we're going to also just discuss some teams that I think would be interested in Dejounte Murray, but maybe either don't have enough to get really involved, or if they do have enough, I'm not sure if they're actually going to pull the trigger on something. And I think a team like that is the Minnesota Timberwolves, where they really have two package options to go after Dejounte Murray. And remember, when Tim Connolly first got the job there in Minnesota, there were a ton of reports that the team was interested in trading for Dejounte Murray. They ultimately traded for Rudy Gobert instead, which ultimately landed Murray in Atlanta from San Antonio. And, well, I think the Timberwolves, they have a chance here to maybe do something really funny and find a way to get Dejounte Murray too. And it would be centered around Mike Conley's contract. Now, Wolves fans, I know you guys love Mike Conley. He's been awesome. Bite has been doing a lot of great things in Minnesota. But the reality is he is quite a bit older, at about 36 years old. This is kind of something that if Minnesota was looking at their future, making a move for Dejounte Murray does make some sense. Although financially, this is really one of those tough pills to swallow. How do you go about trading Mike Conley, taking in more future money in Dejounte Murray, who just signed a 4-year, $120 million extension this past offseason? How do you afford that when you have already extended Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels? They gave Naz Reid a new contract. Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert are both making a ton of money. So it's a complicated issue there. So if you were to go the Mike Conley route, you probably have to throw in other young players. And if we look at the Timberwolves picks, they could throw some pick swaps into this, but they don't really have a lot to work with in the trade department because of the Rudy Gobert trade. So the best way to maybe go about it would be something centered around Karl Anthony Towns, but this is where a team like Minnesota, they just might not be motivated to do something like this around a Towns-Dejounte swap with maybe another player coming back in the fold, whether that be someone like DeAndre Hunter, as an example. And I do think Towns and Trae Young would be a really good combination offensively. Their pick and pop game would be very, very lethal. But if you're Minnesota, with how well you're playing, you're first in the Western Conference, I just can't see them doing anything like this, even though Dejounte Murray, I do believe, would be a player they would like to have, just given the new CBA, their financial picture, and how well they're playing this season. This is not a deal that would likely get done. So instead, let's jump into our second package, and this is a kind of fleshed out trade here, because I think the Pelicans are a team that does make a lot of sense in a Dejounte Murray trade. And I think this is a pretty good kind of haul here for Atlanta as well in return. Now, this package does have Atlanta sending out more than just Dejounte Murray. They're sending out Wesley Matthews, minimum contract, not a big deal here. They are sending Clint Capella as well, their starting center. He has been fantastic. And with the Pelicans, I think when you look at their roster, two things that you could argue they could really use: a true lead point guard and a good, dynamic, rolling big man. They get those two things here with Dejounte and Capella. Now, no disrespect to Jonas Valanciunas, but Capella does some things much better than him, I think, especially come playoff time when it comes to rim protection, kind of being a lob threat as a roll guy. He's just a little bit more athletic and a little bit more natural in those roles, which I think would complement some of the other players on the roster a little bit cleaner. Now, Valanciunas in this is not even included in this deal, so if you're the Pelicans, you could go around and maybe shop him to other teams, or you could look at it and say, we have two really good big men now, and kind of roll it that way, because you do have other players on the roster like Larry Nance who haven't been able to stay healthy consistently. It gives you a little bit more depth, and I think for Atlanta here, look, this is a big switch up. It's a big decision, but you do get 2 first-round picks back in this deal. For what they gave up for Dejounte Murray, it's important to recoup some of that. You get Kyra Lewis Jr. in this deal, not really a big piece of it. In fact, he's mostly just in here for money purposes. You get Cody Zeller. It just gives you a body at the center spot. Really, this decision would be handing Onyeka Okongwu the keys to the center position for Atlanta. I think this would maybe help kind of fix some of their spacing. Moving off of Dejounte kind of clears up, hey, who's the ball handler and who's the guy we primarily want the ball in the hands of. And it's really about like building fit. And I think one thing about CJ McCollum, who is into his 30s, I don't think this is necessarily the best long-term move for Atlanta, but I could see them having some interest in a player like CJ because of his tenure playing with Damian Lillard in Portland. McCollum was very comfortable playing on or off the basketball. I think a little bit of a smoother fit next to Trae Young than Dejounte Murray has been. And the reason for that is, again, because Trae Young hasn't really adapted off the basketball as much as I hoped he would when they first made the Dejounte Murray trade to begin with. So I think CJ McCollum, you kind of get him with the assumption that he'll become the off-ball guard that, you know, still can carry your offense when Trae Young's out of the game. But in situations where Trae and him are sharing the floor, McCollum, like, yes, you're a small backcourt. I think there's going to be some defensive flaws from this, but there is still some big pros here, and I think that's one thing to definitely consider when it comes to the off-ball actions in this. And really the big thing here is you're getting 2 first-round picks, giving up Capella. This is probably not good enough value. For Atlanta, you could argue that the Pelicans maybe have to include a guy like Dyson Daniels. Maybe they have to include another first-round pick in here. This is kind of a starter base package. These aren't meant to be like, hey, this is the deal. This is the only way it can be. It's more like, hey, this is kind of a starting point. Both teams are going to talk to each other off of this and kind of flesh out where they want to go from here. Our next package is with the Brooklyn Nets, and the Nets are a team that I still want to see make a move at some point. They have a fat collection of assets, and they've got a lot of picks that they could move around in a deal. And I think one thing about Dejounte Murray is right now I would say he's a little undervalued, honestly. When we last saw him in San Antonio, he was an all-star level guard, a player who was putting up massive numbers, rebounding, assist numbers, he was scoring the basketball. And I do think when he's comfortable in that lead guard role, not only can your team win with that, but I also think he's going to be highly successful as an individual. And I still think Brooklyn could use a good long-term piece there in the backcourt as a long-term starter. With Murray under contract, $30 million a year going forward, I do think it's a good contract as long as your team doesn't already have a lot of money tied up long-term. And I think the Nets are an example of a team that, hey, they could take a competitive jump by making a move like this without hurting themselves financially long-term, whereas the Minnesota Timberwolves already a ton of money committed. It's a completely different story, but they're in Brooklyn getting Dejounte, I do think would complement their other pieces, complement Cam Thomas, his scoring ability, gives them a little bit more playmaking from the guard spot, which I think they could use, complements Mikal Bridges, and I do think the Nets making this deal, you stay really big. That's one of the positives I like about the Nets positionally. They have a lot of length and size at the guard spots and just across the floor in general. They've got a lot of length, size. Nick Claxton's an awesome big man. I think Dejounte Murray would be an awesome player for the Brooklyn Nets, and for the Atlanta Hawks, you're getting some interesting pieces here. Again, maybe you could argue another first-round pick has to be in here. Again, these are kind of base starter packages of, hey, this is where the conversations start. Financially, these deals work out. Now, I know it does say failed on all of these. It's because of the recently signed restriction. since you just signed an extension, we have to wait essentially a week from the day I'm recording this. So don't worry too much about the recently signed restriction, okay? It's really not a big deal. But when it comes to Dejounte in general and a trade with the Atlanta Hawks here, the Hawks get back Spencer Dinwiddie, who I would assume would get rerouted to a third team. I don't necessarily see him as a great fit next to Trae Young. Not a bad fit. We saw him next to Luka Doncic. Was fairly successful in that role, but I think that ultimately for Atlanta, finding a third team for Dinwiddie would be the most sensible long-term outcome for them. Maybe that's where you get your third first-round pick, is maybe a team who's willing to give up a kind of poor or lower graded first round pick. You get Dariq Whitehead, who is just a first round pick, can really shoot the basketball, gives the Atlanta Hawks another shooting option off the wing. And you get 2 first round picks that are quite a ways down the road. One of them from the Philadelphia 76ers in 2027 and a 2029 first through the Brooklyn Nets. So those are 2 assets that maybe they would become pretty good down the road. It depends on what happens with Joel Embiid and his future in Philadelphia. My guess is he's going to stay there with the Sixers for a while. And then the 2029 first via Brooklyn. Look, the Nets owe some of their own picks to Houston. It's kind of unclear right now what the Nets are going to be 4 or 5 years from now. So maybe that's a high upside selection. Yes, you have to wait quite a bit of time for it, but with the new extensions there for the front office, I think that's something Landry Fields and company would maybe be worth waiting for and just saying like, hey, let's be patient with this. Let's focus on building our team. And right now, that's kind of what they're going through. They trade John Collins for really cheap. I just think they're going to reshape their roster significantly. I just think they're looking at themselves and saying, look, this isn't working. We do believe in Quinn Snyder. We think we have the coach of the future of the organization. It just really comes down to how do we find ways to win games and how do we complement Trae Young if that's the route that they ultimately do go. Now, this deal with the New York Knicks, I think, is another example of the Hawks taking that long-term approach. You're not really getting a high-impact contributor, kind of different from that Pelicans deal where you got CJ McCollum back. The last couple of deals have been more focused on long-term outlook and getting draft picks, maybe a young player in there. And for the Hawks here, you get Evan Fournier. He matches money, not really a key part of the deal other than the financial aspects. Quentin Grimes is in this deal for Atlanta. Obviously, getting him would be quite nice for the Atlanta Hawks because of some of the things he does off the basketball. He's a good point of attack defender. Seems like he comes up with a ton of loose balls every time I watch the Knicks. Quentin Grimes just seemingly is making plays, and that's a pretty good thing to have next to Trae Young, in my opinion. You get 3 first-round picks here. One of them comes from the Dallas Mavericks in this year's draft, 2024 first. That is top 10 protected. Likely will convey, seemingly, unless the Mavs tank again at the end of the year, 2025 first and a 2027 first from the New York Knicks. So I wouldn't say high-grade assets, but I would say assets nonetheless. And the Knicks get Dejounte Murray and Bruno Fernando in this deal. The reason I included Fernando is because I do think it is important for the Knicks to add another body into the center room, just given their injury to Mitchell Robinson. Definitely a tough loss for them. So bringing in Fernando actually does help kind of shore up some of their center minutes a little bit, especially now with Jericho Sims out. And then Dejounte Murray being in this deal, it's a little weird for a couple of reasons, because I think Dejounte Murray has a little bit of an overlapping skill set with Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson. I'm not sure how much this elevates the Knicks, to be completely honest with you. So if you have to ask yourself, like, if you're running the Knicks, would you even do this? And I'm not exactly sure I would. I love Dejounte Murray as a player, but if I had Jalen Brunson already on the roster, I'm not exactly sure. I think you could find a way. I mean, Brunson was really good next to Luka Doncic, and the team found a ton of success, but Brunson's really kind of developed into the lead guard there in New York. So because of that, it's like, do we really need to go out and get another lead guard? And my answer is probably not, although anytime you can get talent in the door, it's something worth considering, especially when the Knicks have a surplus of draft assets. Here's the deal with the Los Angeles Lakers, and this is one that, if I'm Atlanta, I'd probably hang up the phone immediately, but I had to have a Lakers trade in here. Everyone wants to know about the Los Angeles Lakers. Everyone wants to know, are they going to get player X, Y, or Z? And realistically, for me, I just don't see a way that they're going to be able to get Dejounte Murray in this deal here. Again, it says failed because of the salary increase to D'Angelo Russell, and it also says failed because of the Dejounte Murray restriction having to wait until January 5th, but In this, the Hawks get D'Lo, who would probably get rerouted to a third team, just like I said with Spencer Dinwiddie. You get former first-round pick Jalen Hood-Schifino was taken in the first round in 2023. Really, the big thing for him long-term is, can he develop his outside perimeter three-point shot? He's got a really smooth mid-range pull-up jump shot. He's adept in the pick and roll. Does some of the same things Dejounte Murray does offensively, honestly. He can hurt drop coverage with his ability to rise up into 15-footers. I think he's a growing passer. It just really comes down to what your faith is in him long term. Do you believe he's going to be a really good lead guard? Do you believe he's kind of an off the bench player? And your evaluation on him really does kind of shift things. Now, important to note, the Hawks did take Kobe Buffkin right in front of Hood-Schifino, so they had a chance to take him if they really loved him. So I'm not exactly sure that he was super high on their board. Maybe they did like him. You never really know, but they do have Kobe Buffkin still sitting and waiting. Max Christie here in this deal as well, former second-round pick. Max Lewis, someone I was never really in love with during the draft. But anytime you're making a deal like this, if you can get more young players, the better. You want to get as many cheap contracts on your books as possible. Helps you out a lot in terms of kind of filling out the edge of your roster and just making some decisions that's worth considering. You also get 3 second-round picks and a 2029 completely unprotected Lakers first. Again, this is just not a deal that Atlanta should do or will do. But I had to have a Lakers trade in here because everyone wants to know, are the Lakers going to get Dejounte Murray? There's so many reports out right now on that. I just don't think so. And to be honest with you, if Rob Pelinka trades for Dejounte Murray, I might violently shake my monitor and say, Rob Pelinka, have you not learned anything? Because it's going to be eerily similar to the situation with Russell Westbrook. Now, Dejounte Murray is a different player than Russ. He's not the exact same guy. And is more efficient, especially on mid-range pull-up jump shots. There's a few things that Dejounte does much better. There's some things he does worse than Russell Westbrook. They're not equivalents, but I really just do believe if you're the Lakers, like, Dejounte Murray's not the piece you're missing. I think you should be looking for more shooting, more wing talent, more maybe even a center who can play. So if the Lakers and Hawks are making a deal, I would probably be more focused on if it's something around Clint Capella or DeAndre Hunter, maybe something around Sadiq Bey or AJ Griffin, who has been getting DNPs right now, basically, in Atlanta. I think there's a lot of things that the Lakers specifically should look into with Atlanta, and I just don't really know if it's going to be something around Dejounte Murray to begin with. What I want to do to end this video is I want to look at some of the other teams around the league. Now, we're not going to have trade packages for all of them, but we're just going to kind of quick fire and say, could I see this team expressing interest in Dejounte? Celtics and Bucks are definite no's. The Bucks don't have the assets to get into that. The Celtics, there's no reason for them to really shake up what they're doing. The Sixers, Dejounte Murray would be awesome there. I just can't really see it, though. I think they're kind of looking for something bigger. I think they're going to be patient with some of their assets and see if something really big comes available. The Orlando Magic, I did really consider. I think Dejounte would be fantastic there. And I really wanted to make a trade for them. Looking at their pieces, I just wasn't exactly sure what. Maybe you center something around Jonathan Isaac's salary, maybe a couple young guys in there. Like if I was Atlanta, I would say, is there a way I can get Anthony Black? Because that would be sweet. But Orlando's been starting Anthony Black and they really like him. So it's kind of complicated, I think, for the Magic because it's almost like you prematurely sell on some of your young guys who you really like. And then it's hard to kind of find fair value if you're in Orlando's shoes there. I don't think that they have to panic or rush any of this. I think they should be patient. I did like some trades with the Heat, although the money aspect is pretty difficult because Dejounte is making just 18.2 this year. So something around Kyle Lowry is really tough to get done because you have to add salary in from Atlanta's perspective. So, they're not going to want to just give away one of these players making more than $7 million. So that's where it becomes pretty tricky here. And I don't think the Heat would want to include Jaime Jaquez in a deal for Dejounte Murray either. We talked about the Knicks. Cavaliers are definite no. I don't think the Pacers will express interest. The Bulls better not. The Raptors I did think about. Maybe something centered around Pascal Siakam and Dejounte Murray going back. Like this would look something like this, with Pascal going to Atlanta, Dejounte going to Toronto, and maybe even, maybe you have DeAndre Hunter included in here, and then there's some type of draft pick compensation going back. Just something like this. Again, it's not like I just kind of quick fired this, so don't take this as gospel or anything. I'm just like kind of when we're looking at ideas, this is something that I think could make some sense. If you're looking at some type of structure or standpoint of, hey, Siakam could fit next to Trae Young, could fit next to Okongwu or Capella, kind of shores up your power forward spot. And for the Raptors, you get a young player in DeAndre Hunter who is on kind of a big contract despite not being super proven yet at this point in the league, honestly. And then for Dejounte, he would be your point guard going forward. But again, if you're the Raptors, you might say, well, Scotty Barnes might just be that for us to a certain extent. Not a full-on point guard, but a point forward, someone we want to have the ball in his hands quite a bit, running pick and rolls, being the screener in pick and rolls as well. Charlotte, I just can't see with LaMelo. The Wizards are not in buy now mode. I swear to God, if the Pistons do something, please no. And then looking at it from the Western Conference, the Timberwolves we talked about, the Nuggets won't, the Thunder won't, the Kings won't, the Mavericks really can't, the Clippers won't, the Pelicans we talked about, the Rockets. We could maybe see something with the Rockets, but they have money committed to Fred VanVleet. So it's like, again, do you go get a lead point guard? Does that really make sense? I think the Rockets could just use more shooting and a real backup big. So again, if they're making a deal, maybe it's something centered around Bogdanovic, or maybe something centered around a Clint Capella return to Houston would be kind of cool, or something kind of along those lines. Probably not Capella, but kind of just something like that. The Warriors, man, I don't know. I can't really see Dejounte Murray playing for the Warriors. I just really can't. And then when we look at like the Suns, Jazz, Grizzlies, Blazers, and Spurs, I just really don't think that's in the cards, to be honest with you. So it's an interesting collection of moves that could theoretically be made by Atlanta. Again, I think there's a lot to iron out here before the deadline of, hey, what are these players worth? What are teams really looking to do? How desperate are teams? Because right now, early in the season, the standings, a lot of stuff's jumbled right now. Like the 4 seed in the East is the Orlando Magic at 18 and 11. And then the 7 seed is the Cavaliers at 17 and 13. So you're looking at really, a 1.5 game difference between 4 seeds, which is very, very tight. So maybe Atlanta goes on a winning streak. Maybe they go on an even more drastic losing streak. They've currently lost 3 straight games at the time I'm recording this. So, there's possible ups and downs for franchises between now and February, which is going to completely shake up how some of these trades look and really what the market looks like in general too, in terms of who's buying, who's selling, and really what are the price points teams are looking for, which is probably the most important thing to consider. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.